So we're back in England. If you remember, last week I was in Portugal, and we did a live with Anna Soubry, who's a member of Parliament. We taught her live stream. What's interesting in the live streaming with Anna Soubry was that she's able to use video now to go directly to her constituents, like Donald Trump uses Twitter to go directly to the country. This ability to bypass networks is really significant, and it goes far beyond just politicians. About 10 years ago, we were approached by the United Nations. It was actually the UNHCR, that's the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees. These are the people who handle the refugee issues all over the world. And the United Nations had a problem. The problem was that they were dealing with these enormous refugee issues in Mogadishu and in Somalia and in Chad, and they couldn't get any leverage from television networks to cover them. You know, they had to go convince the BBC to go send a crew down to Somalia, and the BBC don't want to do it. It's expensive, it's a lot of money. Maybe they send somebody one time to Cambodia or something, and then even when they get there, they don't know what they're talking about. They got to get the UN person to explain it to them. The whole thing was a mess. So we went to the UN, it was 10 years ago, and we said, you don't need CNN. You don't need the BBC. You don't need MSNBC. You don't need anybody. And they said, what are we talking about? Because they'd spent their whole lives writing letters and making phone calls and emailing and begging the BBC or CNN, please come to Niger. It's a really important story. You really have to do it. And then CNN, they go, Africa, who cares? And it's expensive, and we send the crew. And if either all that effort, they only get a minute 20. So we went to the United Nations and said, look, we have an idea. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to equip your people in the field with iPhones. In those days, you would just begin to do video with iPhones. We're going to give them iPhones, and we're going to teach them to shoot and to edit and to tell their own stories by themselves. And you put this stuff online. This was early, and you don't need the BBC anymore. You don't need CNN. You can do it yourself. You can bypass them. Well, I mean, they were a little nervous because nobody had done anything before. It sounded a little nuts, but they said, okay, let's try it. So we went to Geneva, which is where the UN is headquartered, and we got like 25 or 30 of their people, and we put them through one of our boot camps. And of course, they're very smart people, and they got it, you know, like that. And the great thing was that they could now tell their own, they knew the stories already. Even when the BBC or CNN used to go and meet with them somewhere, they had to explain to the reporter what the hell was going on. And the reporter sort of became an intermediary. So what they were able to do was that by giving them the iPhones, we empowered UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, to tell their own stories. And we did one training in Geneva, and of course it went extremely well. They were already smart, they got it, they got into it, they knew the stories, and they have a passion for it. This is their life we're talking about. So we trained them, and they went out, and we did it again. They said, let's try it again, make sure this wasn't a fluke. So we went back to Geneva, and we did another session in Geneva, and the same thing happened. Of course, there are 30 people, and they got it right away, and they started making these great stories. So now the UN said, well, maybe we should do this on a really big scale, which is, of course, what I want to do. I want to empower people to tell their own stories. I want to get them out of the hands of television networks, which to me is crazy. So we had a big meeting with them, and of course we want to get the deal. And I sat there and I pounded the table and I say, we will go to the most difficult place you have, and we will prove to you that this works everywhere in the world. So they said, okay, Somalia. So I go back to Lisa and I go, guess what? We're going to Somalia. Well, even for the United Nations, Somalia was too difficult, too dangerous. So they sent us to Nairobi, and we went to Kenya, and we did another training with 34 of the people from Africa, and we brought them all into Nairobi. And even Nairobi was a little hairy because while we were there, this busload of Danish United Nations people got shot up, and they kidnapped 3 women. They took them up to Somalia and held them as hostage. So there was no screwing around. I mean, this was dangerous, but we stayed in Nairobi, and we did the test. And of course, they went back and they fanned out, and they also began to post their own stories and tell their own stories. And over the last couple of years, I think we've trained probably 150, maybe 200 United Nations operatives. We're going to do some more next week here in England, along with people from BFBS, which is British Forces Broadcasting Service. But the point of this is that, A, it's all iPhone now all the time. And we've tricked out the iPhones with, microphones, and we edit on the iPhone with iMovie. And of course, you can transmit instantly and broadcast instantly. But the whole point of this exercise is that the United Nations doesn't need the CNN to schlep all the way down to where they are and have some reporter who knows nothing about the story essentially steal the story from the people who really do. Now people can tell their own stories. They have a passion for it. They do it themselves. This is what we were talking to Anna Soubry about yesterday, the day before, when we were in Portugal, and telling her to go live to her constituency also. The technology technology now allows individuals or organizations to be empowered and bypass the middleman, which is what really is, of the conventional news operation. You don't need them, and in fact to that, you don't want them. As Paul Hubel just texted, beat big media and tell your own story. And it's absolutely true. Big media was necessary in the days when cameras were these big heavy things and they cost $100,000 and nobody had a license from the FCC except for NBC and ABC. But today, that's all over. These little phones, like I'm broadcasting you, they cost nothing. Everybody's got one. They're easy to use. And because of the internet, you can go out live to 3 billion people. And you know what else? It lives online. You're on a story on CNN, you're on for a minute and a half and you're gone. And who the hell watched it anyway? Because they only put them on in the middle of the day. So the experience with the United Nations, which we're continuing to do, and the experience with other organizations like AFAW, International Fund for Animal Welfare, with whom we've worked in lots of other organizations, this is about empowering people to tell their own story. And I don't want to get political here. Whatever your story is, whatever passion you have, the technology is here to do it. What we'll do is we'll teach you how to do it in a way that's compelling, comprehensive, and inexpensive. So, like I always say in these things, I urge you to go to thevj.com, check it out, join up, and then sign up for one of our great boot camps. We're doing one next week in London. It's full, but October is in New York, and I hope we'll see you there. Bye.